Welcome to Malice and Mystery, where shadows whisper and the unknown beckons. Step into a realm of spine-tingling horror, eerie mysteries, and chilling tales. From real-life paranormal encounters to unsolved enigmas and spine-chilling urban legends, we bring you the darkest stories from the shadows. Subscribe if you dare, and remember, some mysteries are better left unsolved. These are real stories from real people who were followed by something or someone unknown. Number 9. A dark shadow. In this video, I'll be sharing a scary story that happened to me about 12 years ago, while I was walking home from my friend E's house in North London. It was late at night and I was alone. All of a sudden, I felt like I was being watched. At first, I dismissed it, but then I turned around and saw a dark shadow following me. I tried to ignore it, but the shadow persisted. Then it started getting bigger and scarier. Scariest part was that it wasn't moving like a normal person would. It was moving like a predator stalks its prey. My heart raced as I quickened my pace, but the shadow kept pace with me. I was terrified. I could feel my blood running cold as the shadow loomed closer. But just when I thought I couldn't run anymore, I found a shortcut through a park. I sprinted through the park, adrenaline pumping, and lost the shadow. I never looked back, but I still wonder what it was. Was it a person? Was it something more sinister? To this day, I don't know what that shadow was, but I'll never forget the fear I felt that night. Number 8. A ghostly hitchhiker. Ben had a nightmarish experience on his way back from a camping trip. His car broke down on a deserted highway in the dead of night, and with no cell phone reception, he had only a flashlight to guide him. As he tried to fix the car, he heard heavy footsteps approaching. Assuming it was another motorist coming to help, he didn't pay much attention until he heard a voice say, "Get in my car." Turning around, he saw a tall, skinny man in a tattered suit with a pale and gaunt face unlike any he'd ever seen before. Without hesitation, the stranger opened the passenger door and motioned for Ben to get in. Ben refused, not wanting to get in a car with a complete stranger who looked like he'd just crawled out of a grave. However, the man persisted, insisting that he get in and promising to drive him home. Feeling uneasy but out of options, Ben finally agreed. As soon as he got in the car, Ben realized he'd made a terrible mistake. The man began driving erratically, speeding up and slowing down for no apparent reason, swerving into oncoming traffic and even running several people off the road. At one point, he slammed on the brakes and turned to Ben with a wild look in his eyes. "Are we there yet?" he asked. Startled, Ben responded, "No, not yet." The man's eyes flashed with anger and he started driving even more recklessly. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the car pulled up in front of Ben's house. He quickly unbuckled his seatbelt and rushed out of the car without even thanking the driver. He never looked back, but he could have sworn he heard the man's raspy voice echoing behind him, saying, "Don't forget, we'll meet again." Ben was deeply shaken by the encounter and could unshake the feeling that their paths would cross again. Number 7. A haunted highway. A young woman was driving home from a long trip when she decided to take a shortcut on a deserted highway. She had heard stories about the road from other drivers, tales of strange lights and unsettling noises that echoed across the empty asphalt. Despite the warnings, she pressed on, eager to get home as quickly as possible. As darkness fell, the eerie atmosphere of the highway became more apparent. The streetlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that danced around her car. She could hear the wind whistling through the trees that lined the road, creating a haunting melody that sent shivers down her spine. Suddenly, she saw a pair of headlights in the distance. They grew brighter as they approached, illuminating the road ahead. She slowed down and prepared to pass the oncoming car. But as they approached each other, the other car didn't swerve away. Instead, it continued straight toward her. She slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The two cars collided head-on, sending her vehicle spinning out of control. She could remember the screech of tires, the shattering of glass, and then everything went black. When she woke up, she was lying on the ground next to her mangled car. She was dazed and confused, but she could feel a searing pain in her chest. She looked down and saw a bloody hole where her heart should be. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She was paralyzed with fear as she realized what had happened. She had been stabbed in the chest and left to die on the side of the road. And as she lay there bleeding out, she could hear the sound of the other car speeding away into the darkness. She knew that whoever was responsible for her injuries wasn't going to come back. And as the minutes ticked by, she could feel her life force draining away. The last thing she remembered was the eerie glow of the streetlights reflecting in the killer's eyes as he or she drove away, leaving her to die. Number 6. The Phantom Hitchhiker. My brother and his friend were driving home from a camping trip when they decided to stop for gas. They pulled into a deserted gas station and started pumping their car. As they were doing so, they noticed a hitchhiker standing by the side of the road. He was tall and skinny, wearing a tattered gray jacket and a faded baseball cap. He was thumbing a ride, and my brother and his friend felt sorry for him, so they offered him a lift. The hitchhiker thanked them and climbed into the back seat of the car. Soon as he did, the atmosphere in the car changed. The hitchhiker let out a sigh that seemed to suck the warmth out of the air. My brother and his friend could feel the hairs on their arms stand up. The hitchhiker turned around to face them and gave them a chilling smile. His eyes were sunken and his skin was pale and dry. "Thank you for giving me a ride," he rasped in a voice that sounded like sandpaper on wood. "I've been walking for miles and I'm exhausted." My brother and his friend exchanged uneasy glances. Something about the hitchhiker's appearance made them uncomfortable. Still, they had already invited him into their car, so they felt obligated to take him to his destination. The hitchhiker told them to drive past the next exit, and they did so without questioning him. After a few minutes, he told them to pull over. "This is where I get off," he said, opening the car door. My brother and his friend watched as the hitchhiker stepped out of the car and disappeared into the darkness. They didn't see him again, but they could have sworn they heard his voice echoing behind them. "Don't ever pick me up again," he said, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. My brother and his friend never forgot the phantom hitchhiker, the mysterious stranger who had climbed into their car and brought with him the chill of the grave. Number 5. The Hitchhiking Ghost. Many years ago, I was traveling through the countryside with some friends when our car broke down. We were stranded on a dark and deserted road with no cell service and no way to call for help. We decided to walk to the nearest town, which was several miles away. As we walked, we could hear the distant sound of traffic, but there wasn't a single car passing by. The road was empty. Suddenly, we saw a bright light in the distance. We stopped to flag down the oncoming vehicle, but it wasn't a car that approached us. It was a truck. The truck pulled over, and the driver, a burly man with a bushy mustache, offered us a ride into town. We gratefully accepted the offer and climbed into the back of the truck. The driver was friendly and chatty, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As we drove, we could see the driver's face illuminated by the dashboard lights, but whenever we tried to catch his eye, he would look away. And when we glanced at his hands, he would quickly cover them with his jacket. We were puzzled by his behavior, but we were too grateful for the ride to complain. The driver dropped us off at the edge of town, and we thanked him profusely. As we climbed out of the truck, we could see the driver's face clearly for the first time. It was pale and gaunt, with sunken eyes and a gaping hole where his nose should have been. Before we could react, he had sped away, disappearing down the road. We were horrified. We had just ridden in a truck, driven by a ghost. Number 4. Uninvited Guest. As a child, I used to babysit for a family in my neighborhood. One evening, I was looking after their 2 children while the parents went out for dinner. The kids were asleep, so I settled in to watch TV. Suddenly, I heard a knock at the door. I went to check and was surprised to see a man standing there. He introduced himself as a friend of the family and explained that he was dropping off some wine he had borrowed. I let him in, and he handed me the bottle before saying goodbye. As he left, I closed the door and returned to the living room. That's when I noticed something strange. The man had left his jacket behind. I called the family to ask if he had mentioned having a guest, but they said they hadn't. Confused, I decided to check the jacket for identification. That's when I saw a name tag hanging from the pocket. It read, John Doe. I looked up the name online, but there was no match. I couldn't find any record of a John Doe living in the area. The family had no idea who he was. The mystery of the uninvited guest has never been solved. Number 3, the vanishing hitchhiker. My friend and I were driving home from a party when we decided to take a shortcut through the countryside. The roads were empty and the scenery was beautiful, but we couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as we drove. Suddenly, we saw a hitchhiker standing by the side of the road. We pulled over and offered him a ride. The hitchhiker was a young man with a backpack and a guitar. He thanked us and climbed into the car. As we drove, we made small talk with the hitchhiker. He told us he was a musician and that he was hitchhiking to a gig. We arrived at our destination and dropped him off. The hitchhiker thanked us and started walking away. That's when we noticed something strange. He seemed to be walking towards a dead end. We called out to him, but he didn't respond. We pulled over and got out of the car to investigate. But when we reached the spot where the hitchhiker had disappeared, we found nothing but a backpack and a guitar. We called the police, but they found no evidence of foul play. The hitchhiker had vanished without a trace. Number 2, the ghostly encounter. I was backpacking through Europe with a friend of mine when we decided to visit the historic city of Edinburgh. We were staying in a hostel, and one evening we decided to go out for dinner. We walked through the crowded streets, admiring the architecture and soaking up the atmosphere. Suddenly, we turned onto a narrow alleyway, and that's when we saw him. The old man was hunched over, his face obscured by the shadows of his wide-brimmed hat. He didn't seem to notice us as he shuffled past, muttering to himself. We were startled by the sudden appearance of the old man, and we could unhelp but exchange uneasy glances. Just as we were about to turn away, we heard the old man speak. "Beware," he rasped in a voice that sounded like dry leaves crunching underfoot. "Beware the darkness that lies ahead." We were shaken by the old man's cryptic warning, and we could unhelp but wonder what he meant. We continued walking, but we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Suddenly, we turned around and saw the old man standing behind us, his face now illuminated by the light from a nearby shop. We gasped in surprise. He had vanished moments ago, and now he was standing right in front of us. "You should have listened to my warning," he said, his voice echoing in the narrow alleyway. "The darkness is coming for you." We were terrified and we turned to run, but it was too late. The darkness had already claimed us. Number 1, the stalker in the woods. One day, my friend and I were exploring a dense and secluded forest near our hometown. We were excited to discover a new hiking trail, and we could wait to get away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. As we ventured deeper into the woods, we could feel the oppressive atmosphere closing in around us. The trees seemed to close in overhead, creating a canopy that blocked out the sunlight and cast long, eerie shadows on the forest floor. We could hear the sound of birds chirping and the wind rustling through the leaves, but there was something else. A low, guttural growl that seemed to be coming from the trees all around us. We stopped and listened intently, but we couldn't pinpoint the source of the noise. It was then that we realized we weren't alone in the woods. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash in the underbrush. We turned to see a massive shape lumbering out of the trees. It was a bear, and it was blocking our path. We froze in fear as the bear stared at us intently. Then it did something that made our blood run cold. It started to follow us. The bear ambled along behind us, keeping a safe distance, but never letting us out of its sight. We could feel its presence like a dark cloud hanging over us. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it disappeared. We never saw the bear again, but we couldn't shake the feeling that we had been watched the entire time. If you enjoyed these scary stories, please share your own experiences in the comments below. Also, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. Thank you for watching.